Coogs House. The Big 12 saw another program donate their way to the big time this week. Houston fought for 30 years to get into this conference. Now, can they keep up?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Appreciate you make sure to listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. If you want to join the conversation but you don't know what to say, as an everyday a weird question today, but I want to ask you today what your first job was that might make more sense later. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. More fun on that one later. But I want to A, answer the trivia question from last time. I want to B, talk in our first segment some about big donor money after what happened at Kansas this week. Second segment, I want to talk some about traditions going away at least other schools, but why I think it's potentially still a problem. And last but not least, speaking of problems, I think there's some scheduling problems on the horizon for Houston Cougar basketball. First, as mentioned, the trivia question from last week: how many bowl games Houston appeared in, and was their record? The answer was 30 bowl games. Houston's 13, 16, and 1. Those darn ties. I just forget about those ties. 13, 16, and 1. Given the 30-year hiatus from Big 12 play or from Power 4, Power 5 conference play, I actually don't think that's as bad as it might look on the surface. But Houston's Big 12 teammates, now that they're in the Big 12, have been donating money at record pace. Record pace. Kansas this week had a $300 million donation from David Booth. Kansas reports it's the largest donation in school history to any part of the university, especially athletics, one of the largest donations in college athletics history in general. David Booth is the founder of Dimensional Fund Advisors, global investment firm located in Austin, Texas. He's a Lawrence native, Kansas alum, etc. And it's interesting that they've already kind of got this divvied up a little bit, but not a lot of it. 75 million of the 300 million is going to what they're calling the Gateway District. They're building a bunch of different stuff around the stadium to be like sports bars and restaurants and things to do in town as you're there, as opposed to having tailgating areas, having like a thing, having like places to go spend money and do things, and stimulate the economy in a lot of ways, right? And that's 75 million of the 300 going directly to that, but the other 225 million is to be used at Kansas Athletics' discretion. So the school report mentioned some idea of revenue sharing. Booth has been quoted at various stages of his donations. This is not his first donation. It's just the largest by like leaps and bounds. He's mentioned things about facilities and however it can help. He just wants the school to take the money and figure out what the other 225 can help with. He donated 50 million back in 2017. He's not new to this. The funny thing is they actually had a couple donate like 25 million a couple weeks ago. Derek Johnson of Locked On Jayhawks told us in the group chat earlier today. But I think this is interesting because that 225 million, I mean, you could frankly, without even investing it, watching it grow, etc., that could just be your revenue share in the house settlement for the next 10 years. And then you don't have to worry about that on your books at all, right? That can dramatically change your athletic department in a lot of different ways. A decade of rev share, who knows where you're even at 10 years from now? It just feels like that alone would be a great spend of money. They just put all this money into their facilities so you could put it into, I don't know, more training staffs or find some other way to invest it into the player experience, maybe help support the non-revenue sports because football is going to have this gigantic adventure of a game day experience. You expect that to bring in some money. Maybe you build media centers. I don't know, whatever the case may be. It's a bunch of money for Kansas. Texas Tech obviously spent the summer of Cody Campbell, former Tech player and billionaire oil chairman of the board of Texas Tech, oil salesman and stuff, I should say. He sold his company for over $4 billion and has been buying a gigantic, I guess his bill is gigantic for the roster at Texas Tech over the offseason. And I should point out, like, NIL money is the latest. But again, Cody Campbell, like, it's Jones AT&T Stadium in Lubbock, but it's Cody Campbell Field at Jones AT&T Stadium. He'd been donating money about was it 16, 18 months ago at this point, Baylor's staff was wearing the We Pay Players t-shirts all around their practices. It's been very much something they've embraced. BYU has been doing their thing with money as well and bringing in a bunch of big-time recruits. We know Utah does a lot of the same things. That is all to say the Big 12 has seen a sharp rise in how much money is being donated, Kansas being the latest example. People typically say that Houston should lean on Tillman Fertitta, whose name and dollars are all over the University of Houston's campus, athletics and academics alike. I'm not saying that he couldn't obviously continue to help out. The guy has been fortunate enough through owning the Rockets and Landry's and so on to be very wealthy. And so he could obviously do a lot of things. I also, and just like thinking like, who else could donate? I found like other names like Matt Mullenwang's the founder of WordPress, has a public net worth of over $400 million per Google. Welcome Wilson Jr. is technically a Denver alum, but Welcome Wilson Sr. Was the chairman of the board at Houston and had a big company as well. And there's a lot of money. I don't know how it divvied up to his next generation, obviously, but as a Denver alum that's a native Houstonian and is back, could he send money back? I don't know. Google says Bruce DeBroussard is a Houston alum and is the current CEO at Humana, has a net worth $215 million. John Moore was on the board already once at Houston. He owned the Padres for a long time. He's a very philanthropic person. He's a Houston alum. He could he, with the investments he's made since selling the Padres in the 90s, what could he do? Marvin Odom, CEO of Shell Oil, Dominic Ning, CEO of East West Bank. You got a bunch of guys a bunch of people, I should say, that do have money. And so I don't think that there's a lack of I don't think the lack of money, I should say, is as dramatic as people want to make it out to be. I still think people don't want to, they think, oh, this is not the game. This is not what he should be doing, whatever older school mentality. And I actually think it's really good as a conference to see your conference mates making these investments because, frankly, as the Big 12 was going to try to compete with the other two conferences, right? In this whole thing, we talk about the ACC being a little bit behind or whatever. As you're going to try and compete with the SEC and the Big 10, you need to continue knocking down stereotypes. And one stereotype is those schools got cash, you don't, right? Well, if Kansas has cash and Tech has cash and Baylor has cash and BYU has cash, suddenly you're starting talking to a bunch of conference teams that have cash, right? And if they all have the money, then it stands to reason that suddenly that's no longer a difference between the conferences. And then you talk about the 5 stars being brought in. And Houston's participated in that part of this, right? They've brought in 2026 class in football is an incredible class. They were kind of working. You kind of take off that difference. Okay, suddenly there aren't as many differences between the conferences if these things continue. And I think Houston should strive to do that. That's how you work your way into that national conversation as a conferencing university. I think it's a great time to be in the conference as it's heading in that direction. And Houston does need to get in this game. I totally get that part that they're not fully in it. They have not been as far into it as others. I say that to say that landing and keeping 5-star talents will continue to be big and important as far as winning games goes. But the Big 12 is going to have to continue to debunk these stereotypes. And while Houston gets to recruit, it does have more alumni that make more money than people might intuitively have thought, the direction that it's being pushed by Fritz, head coach Willie Fritz, AD Eddie Nunez, President Dr. Couture, frankly, Kelvin Sampson, women's basketball coach Mitchell, you had Carl Lewis, Vittoria over at volleyball. Like, they've got people worth investing in. They've got direction now that is firmer than it feels like it's ever been. And while it may not have happened over the last 30 years for historical reasons, we'll continue to reference at various points, I'm sure, when Houston did not get into the Big 12 as the Southwest Conference dissolved, right? Now that we're here, we're getting these things set up. And I think Houston can be closer than they presently are. And I'm not saying you need to write a bunch of billionaires with U of H degrees to send money or whatever. But I think that it's interesting that, like, you know, David Booth, his most recent donation was $50 million in 2017, which is a lot of money. Don't get me wrong. That is nowhere near the 300 he just wrote the check for, and the check is blank, folks. They can put on whatever they want to for the most part. I I think you can see one single seismic shift like that. It doesn't have to be from 50 to 300 million, but it happened elsewhere in the conference, and I don't think it's impossible it happens at Houston either. I do think, though, that you're going to need to see at least, maybe not one $300 million check, but like 1030s would be awesome. And I think that may be the direction you got to go. And I think those kinds of things are going to be there as the conference moves forward. Speaking of the conference voted on something on Thursday that may end traditions elsewhere in the conference. And while that's fun to laugh at from afar, I do have my questions about it. Before we get to those questions, I do want to remind you guys that today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at Wayfair, because right now, as summer winds down, again, Teacher Coach Podcast, we're here. Summer is winding down, unfortunately. There's something nice with getting back into the routine that you love, and Wayfair makes it easy to set up yourself for the season ahead. From bedding and linens to storage solutions for every room, Wayfair is your one-stop shop to refresh your home. I mentioned we're coming up with a 1-year anniversary of moving into the house we purchased. Every time you need an end table, a lamp, a vase, you find out you need a lot more of those things than you thought you did. The best place I've found to go get them is at Wayfair. Get organized, get refreshed, and get back into the routine for way less at wayfair.com right now. Shop all things home. That's wayfair.com, Wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Park Rangers Locked On Coogs here. And on Thursday, the Big 12 formally voted 15-1 to solidify a policy of issuing 15-yard penalties after a third instance of fans throwing things on the field. And before you even press send on the comment, though you should, yes, Texas Tech was the one that voted against it. They have a tradition as a university of throwing tortillas in the air, and they end up on the field and all and all those kind of things. Look, I do like to laugh at how the whole conversation, you can't do that anymore, to the silly little tortilla tradition. That is very funny. It is conceptually very funny to laugh on the outside end. I would also point out that players that have played there in Lubbock on that Cody Campbell field we mentioned in the first segment would tell you that a dry tortilla hitting them in the back would be kind of the least of their worries based on other things being thrown throughout a football game at Jones Stadium, right? Like that, just frankly, other things were being thrown, right? And I think that can be pretty gross, dangerous, frankly, when it's things like batteries and like it can get bad, right? So I do think that there's got to be something to that. However, at a more macro level, backing it up a second, I also think that the conference voting to ban your tradition basically, at a 15-1 clip would kind of suck. And I think it would kind of suck a lot because it reeks of this, like, that tradition specifically, I should say, reeks of like an overseer mentality where it's like, you're here to entertain me and you're going to do what I want to do and I can do whatever I want to you as you're the entertainment, blah, 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 blah. Like, that's not great. However, canceling traditions, as we just did, makes you think, okay, when was the last time we saw this play out? The last time we saw this play out in a way that really delayed a game was not a Big 12 game. It was Texas, Georgia on national television last year when Texas fans threw a bunch of garbage on the field over a call they didn't like and delayed the game long enough that someone in New York called the stadium and had the refs replay, review a replay or whatever, when otherwise Georgia would have run a play and that never would have happened, right? The replay went Texas' way. It could have dramatically changed the game and given these little petulant, puberty-filled fans of throwing fits on the sideline with trash. It could have given them what they wanted. Now, Texas didn't capitalize on the flipping of the penalty or whatever, which is the ultimate, like, ha, gotcha kind of moment. But I think that conversation did get people to think like, how can we prevent this? And the Big 12 was like, oh God, we actually have a school that does that. We can't let this potentially slow down a game. So first time, second time, there'll be referee warnings. Third time will be a 15-yard penalty. And I don't like the idea of canceling traditions because of what's happening elsewhere. I think that's not great. I also would point out, and this is perhaps a Houston specific problem. This is Locked on Cougs, right? This is not Locked on Texas Tech, although Chris Love and I'm sure talking about over there as well. Cowan probably has really strong opinions on this, actually. I wonder. Look, let's just be honest. Houston's a gigantic city filled with alumni from a bunch of different places. And as Houston is a gigantic city with alumni from a bunch of different places, there's a decent chance that the program Houston is playing against on any given Saturday has alumni that live in Houston. There's a decent chance there's a lot of those alumni because there's just a lot of people in Houston. And I don't know if I fully trust the discerning powers of a bunch of referees to figure out who threw what on the field and what team that person was rooting for, especially when those same referees have trouble doing things like spot the ball sometimes, or they can't tell me what is and isn't a catch. Like if I sat down with a referee and played 14 different would or wouldn't be catches, I don't think if I pulled in another referee, if they'd had the same opinion on the 14, right? I don't think they could tell me to a T what makes and doesn't make a catch in a football game. I don't know that I want them telling me that was definitely a Houston fan that threw that on the field. That was definitely not I don't know that I trust them on that. And that, frankly, may be the Houston side of this, where like a bunch of Tech fans are going to throw tortillas on the field at the games in Houston and ultimately try and get now tortillas be, I guess, obvious enough, right? There's if you know anything about anything refing the Houston versus Texas Tech game, you probably know that tortillas are coming from one side and not the other, right? But generally speaking, through secondary market or frankly just living in town, like there's a chance that visitor fans have more than just the visitor section of the Houston game because they have a bunch of alumni in the city, and I that's a lot to ask a referee that has trouble doing their own job. And I don't mean to say that I want that job. The job looks really hard. But I don't know about that. All right. Now, speaking of problems, because I think there's problems with that. Speaking of other problems, I do think there's potentially about to be some problems with Houston's basketball schedule that could also kind of suck. Speaking of things that suck, we'll talk about what those are in a second. Before we get too far, today's show is brought to you, as mentioned, by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live bold predictions and have preseason hunches for just 24 hours. FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling an MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, divine winner, maybe even, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 kicks off, this is your moment. If you think that CJ Stroud's going to win the MVP because of all those extra Tank Dell throws he's got, go hit it. If you think the Texans are going to win the AFC South, go hit it. But do it on the 26th. Now it's FanDuel app. It's FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. Parker Rangers Locked on Cougs here. And I want to talk about basketball for a second. Obviously, I'm a basketball person. I got a chemological monster. I got a bunch of problems with basketball. I like basketball a lot. Houston Cougar basketball is like the thing that gets me through the other 3/4 of the year, half the year, whatever it is. I love Houston Cougar basketball. I love watching Houston play fun teams. And we've been kind of piecing together schedules of what their non-conference schedule is like. I will point out that in years past, by mid-August, we have typically received the non-conference slate of Houston Cougar basketball schedule. It is August 14th, and as they're recording this podcast, there is not a official non-conference schedule out. We did have a couple games confirmed. The Florida State game, for example, at the Toyota Center was confirmed, and the opener and the exhibition with Mississippi State was confirmed, right, by the university. We don't have official schedule. NBA schedules are out, which gives us some insight and tells us what stadiums have what going on. And I want to give Chris Gardner credit because he was been on this for a second. And frankly, when I was looking stuff up, his name came up a lot. So I want to give him credit. I also want to give Joseph Duarte credit for putting things together. But right now, you've got November 3rd at Lehigh, November 8th with Towson, November 12th with Oakland, November 16th, you're playing Auburn in Birmingham, which is a big one. November 12th, you got Ryder. Then you have the week of Thanksgiving and the Player Eras Festival in Las Vegas, where you get Syracuse and Tennessee at least. Then you don't know who your third team will be. You come back from that to play Florida State at the Toyota Center. That one is confirmed. You then have Jackson State, New Orleans, and then you theoretically are playing Arkansas right now. Joseph Duarte has that one in New Jersey. More on that in a second. And then you have Middle Tennessee, December 29th, before starting Big 12 play in January of 2026. And so that Arkansas game in New Jersey has already been moved a little bit, and we haven't seen confirmations about that one. Now, we were excited at first about that being on 12/20 in New York City, December 20th in New York City, because we're thinking, okay, there's another big game at Madison Square Garden that night with Tech and Duke. Like, that's going to be awesome. Let's get in on that, get out back to like a one ticket kind of 2-game, get some fun hoops going. Not quite. And then Barclays opened. Oh, we're going to go play in an NBA stadium, Christmas time in New York. Still cool. That's awesome. However, we've got Madison Square Garden booked. Barclays actually has a women's basketball event with 4 Blue Bloods. It's got UConn, Iowa, Louisville, and Tennessee. That's been on the schedule. That was on the schedule before Houston was even rumored to play Arkansas. And frankly, they're playing in Barclays, which is also where the New York Liberty, the WNBA team, play. I think there's something going on there with that. I'd also point out that UConn does very well in New York City in terms of women's basketball draw. And then you look at the NBA schedule that are now out at Madison Square Garden. The Knicks play at home on the 19th and the 21st, which means you can't play Madison Square the night before or the night after that Tech, I forget if it's UConn or Duke, whatever, right? The Nets have home games in Barclays on the 18th and the 21st, which makes like the 19th feel pretty unlikely, right? If they got a big event the next day. And so presumably you can't get it into New York City. So then it looks like, according to, and I will point out, I think Chris Gardner had that like early on, shortly after the game got announced, like, hey, this might not happen. He was quick to put an eye on that women's event happening there and kind of putting 2 and 2 together there. Duarte putting in Newark, I think, indicates there's probably some conversation of that happening. Has not been officially announced by the school as being in Newark. Presumably, you're going to play at the Prudential Center if you're playing in Newark, which is where the New Jersey Devils play. They do have basketball setups for Seton Hall, but it certainly doesn't have the allure at all of New York City, right? And frankly, that it has not been officially announced almost worries you a little bit. Like, wait a second, why hasn't it? Why not? Right? Look, I'm not saying the DFW Metroplex has the allure either. It certainly isn't like the wintry time of New York City for that or that you'd think of, and it's not a big road trip to go see a new place because I mean, whatever, right? It's just up 45 from Houston, but it's probably more equidistant than basically anywhere else between Houston fans and Arkansas fans. And now the NBA schedules are out. We know that the Mavs, the Dallas Mavericks, are out of town on the 20th and the 22nd. So you could play that weekend against Arkansas somewhere relatively in the middle of the two. I didn't look over at Dickies Arena in Fort Worth, but I think you get kind of the same story there because it's a lot less used stadium. You could also, for what it's worth, try Jerry World in DFW. The Cowboys are playing on the evening of the 21st, even though it's that weird part of the year where there are the occasional Saturday NFL games and whatever. You could play a basketball game there and just say, hey, everyone from Arkansas, Houston, show up, man. Let's fill this thing up and sell cheap seats way up high and all that kind of fun stuff. Really get a raucous crowd there in the middle. The Cotton Bowl isn't for another week, and then the Big 12 championship game has been a couple weeks before that in football. So you really, you do have some nice crossover as far as like an empty space there for that Saturday. Um, Listen, you don't want this game happening in Toyota Center if you don't have to. You wouldn't be you wouldn't be breaking that 3 games number that declares Toyota as a second home arena per NCAA bylaws. This would just be this theoretical second game at Toyota Center. You're playing, as mentioned, Florida State there as well. But you would be ruffling feathers by getting close to that. You have already kind of ruffled some of those feathers and moving the ownership from that regional with the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 games. The South Regionals happening at Toyota Center. Houston made a big deal of making that not them hosting it anymore, even though it was initially them hosting it. And so, flirting with the other end of the reason that you might potentially be excluded from playing there. The NCAA says that you cannot play in a stadium that you played 3 or more games in your regional. You cannot be slotted in that regional, and it cannot be a regional that you are hosting unofficially. And so, moving themselves off of host duty is certainly one thing. You don't want to be pushing the limit on the games either. Look, I want this game to happen for a lot of reasons. We've talked when the Big 12 Matrix came out about how the home and away split might have hurt Houston from a quad 1 versus quad 2 game perspective, just giving them, like, if you just inverted Houston's home and road games on the Matrix, they'd have, based on last year's records, a lot more quad 1 games. That's just the way it worked out. They're going to play some of the tougher teams at home. That would have been more likely to be a quad 1 game on the road than the road games they're going to end up playing for the most part, right? You also, we saw what happened last year at the Players era. On the one hand, you got Alabama, which was a really strong opponent. On the other hand, you got Notre Dame and San Diego State. And while San Diego State gave you all you could handle, they weren't exactly the greatest teams by March and didn't help your quad 1, 2, 3, etc. Yes, you've got Florida State. Yes, you've got Auburn early. You also don't. I mean, Auburn is coming off of a very high with a very old team. Bruce Pearl's a good coach and all that, but who knows what they look like this year? They did a lot of transferring around. Florida State can be such an up and down program. You need opponents that work on your resume here. Arkansas with Calipari feels dead set to be one. And this game, it just feels like we should know more about it at this point, right? You want another quad 1 game, a neutral site. Calipari Arkansas team feels destined to be that. It just worries me a little bit. It just worries me, and frankly, I also just want to see the basketball. Like regardless of how it shapes up with quad 1s and 2s and whatever, and seeding it later. I also just want to see it. It's a good game, right? And so that's part of it too. So we'll see. We'll obviously follow up more as official things come out, and hopefully within 10 minutes of this episode dropping, this is obsolete because there's some big announcement that they're actually going to get to play in Madison Square Garden because it got lumped into some jamboree kind of thing there or whatever, right? Like, hopefully something fun like that happens. But whatever happens, we follow it here at Locked on Coogs each and every day. Now, trivia question coming at the end of the episode every single day lately. And given that we're talking about Houston versus Arkansas, I was like, okay, they were both, they've both been around for a minute. Historical basketball program. What is Houston's record versus Arkansas? So if you know their record against Arkansas all time in men's basketball, tell us in the comments down below. Bonus points if you know anything about any one of those games, because I only knew of 2 myself personally. So tell me in the comments down below if you know of anything about any one of those games. I just guess I told you there's more than 2 games, but anyway, tell us in the comments down below. Locked on Cougs, proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.